There is something inside you that has never been broken. Not bent, not corrupted, not destroyed. No matter what you have lived through, no matter how many times the world told you to sit down, be quiet, stop dreaming, be realistic. There is a frequency inside you that was placed there before you took your first breath, before anyone handed you a name, before the world began its long and patient work of convincing you to be smaller than you are. And that frequency, that original, uncopied, unrepeatable signal, is still broadcasting, right now, in this moment, whether you can hear it or not. I want you to stay with that for a second, because most people live their entire lives without ever stopping long enough to listen. They wake up, they go through the motions, they chase the goals that other people handed them. They wear the identities that circumstance assigned them. And somewhere deep underneath all of that noise, underneath all of that activity and obligation and distraction, the signal keeps transmitting, waiting. Patient beyond anything human patience could explain. You were not born neutral. You were not born as a blank page waiting for the world to write on you. That is one of the great lies that modern life perpetuates, this idea that you arrive empty and that everything you become is simply the result of what happened to you, what was poured into you, what the environment shaped you to be. That framing makes you a product, a consequence, an effect with no original cause. But that is not what you are. I remember the first time this truth hit me, not as a concept, not as a pleasant philosophical idea to discuss over dinner, but as a lived, visceral, undeniable reality. I was going through one of the hardest periods of my life. Everything I thought I had built, everything I thought I understood about myself and my direction, it was crumbling. And in that silence that follows collapse, when there is nothing left to distract you, I heard something, faint at first, like a signal coming from very far away, pushing through interference, pushing through the static of everything I had been taught to believe about who I was and what was possible for me. And what I heard was not a voice telling me what to do. It was something older than instruction. It was recognition. It was the sensation of something in me saying, yes, this is where you begin. That moment changed the entire direction of my life. And I am telling you this because I believe, with everything I have, that there is a version of that moment waiting for you, not somewhere in a distant, hopeful future. Right here, right now, in the life you are already living. Ask yourself something honestly. When did you last feel completely aligned? Not happy in the surface sense, not the happiness that comes from a good meal or a pleasant afternoon, but aligned. That deep cellular sense that what you are doing, what you are thinking, who you are being in the world is connected to something real inside you, something true. When did you last feel that? For many of you, you have to go back a long way to find it. Some of you might trace it to childhood, that unself-conscious state where you simply were, without apology, without performance, without the constant monitoring of how you appeared to others. Children have not yet learned to suppress their frequency. They broadcast it freely, wildly, completely. Watch a child lost in play, and you are watching someone in total alignment with their inner signal. There is no gap between what they feel and what they express. No filter between their inner world and their outer movement through life. Then the education begins. And I do not mean formal education alone, though that is certainly part of it. I mean the broader education that life delivers, the lessons about what is acceptable, what is safe, what will earn you love and belonging, what will cost you love and belonging. The long, slow, well-intentioned process through which the people and systems around you teach you to adjust your signal to match the frequency that the world around you is comfortable receiving. And here is what makes this so difficult to see clearly. Most of that suppression was not done to you with malice. Your parents, your teachers, your community, they were not conspiring to silence you. They were doing what had been done to them. They were passing on the frequencies they themselves had inherited. Generation after generation of human beings learning to turn down the volume on their own original signal because the world around them could not hold it, could not understand it, could not find a comfortable category for it. But here is what I need you to understand right now. The fact that the suppression was unintentional does not make it less real. And the fact that it happened does not mean it is permanent. Your original frequency is not gone. It has never left. It has been waiting with a patience that should humble every one of us, waiting for the moment when you stop running long enough to hear it again, waiting for you to want the truth of who you are more than you want the comfort of who you have been pretending to be. That is what this is about. Not motivation in the shallow sense of feeling pumped up for a few days before sliding back into old patterns. This is about something far more fundamental. This is about learning to hear your own signal again, learning to trust it. And then, this is where everything changes, learning to align the deepest layers of your subconscious mind with the causal realm from which that signal originates. Because when those two things meet, when your subconscious and the causal realm lock into alignment, what happens next is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is not magic in the superstitious sense of that word. It is the most natural thing in the universe, and you were built for it. Nobody sat you down and said, "We are going to silence you now." That is the insidious part. That is what makes this particular wound so difficult to locate, so difficult to name, and therefore so difficult to heal. If someone had looked you in the eye at age 7 and said, "From this point forward, we are going to systematically teach you to distrust your own instincts, suppress your own desires, and perform a version of yourself that is acceptable to everyone around you," you would have resisted. You would have fought back. But that is not how it happens. It never happens that way. It happens gently, gradually, with love even. And that is precisely why it works so completely. Let me take you back. Think about the first time you expressed something true about yourself, some genuine enthusiasm, some wild creative impulse, some deep knowing about what you wanted your life to look like, and the response you received was not celebration, but correction. Maybe it was a laugh that carried a little too much dismissal in it. Maybe it was a well-meaning adult saying, "That's a nice dream, but be practical." Maybe it was the silence of a room full of people who simply did not understand what you were reaching toward and whose incomprehension felt, to your young and sensitive nervous system, like rejection. You felt that, and your subconscious recorded it. Because here is what most people do not fully appreciate about the subconscious mind. It is not simply a filing cabinet where experiences go to be archived. It is an active, continuously operating guidance system. And its primary function, the function that evolution built into it over hundreds of thousands of years, is protection, safety, survival. And so when your subconscious registers pain, social pain, emotional pain, the pain of rejection or ridicule or misunderstanding, it does not simply note the experience and move on. It builds a wall. It constructs a rule. It says that expression led to pain, therefore suppress that expression. And then it enforces that rule without asking your conscious permission, without even letting you know the rule exists. This is how the muting happens. Not through a single dramatic event in most cases, though sometimes it is a single event, something sharp and defining, but through accumulation, through the slow, steady layering of small corrections, small redirections, small moments of learning that certain parts of you are not welcome in certain rooms. And over time, those layers compact, they harden, they become what we eventually call personality or character, or simply the way I am. We stop seeing them as learned responses and start experiencing them as fundamental truths about our nature. I lived inside that confusion for years, decades, honestly. There was a period in my life where I was extraordinarily productive by every external measure. I was moving, achieving, producing, engaging. And I had convinced myself, genuinely convinced myself, that I was living with purpose. But something kept nagging at me. Something underneath the activity felt hollow, like I was running an engine that was pointed in slightly the wrong direction. Not completely wrong. I was not living someone else's life in the obvious sense. But there was this persistent, quiet, aching sense that the deepest layer of who I was, the frequency I described in the beginning, was not actually involved in any of what I was building. I was achieving, but I was not aligning. And there is a profound difference between those two things that our culture almost never talks about, because achievement is visible and measurable and celebrated, while alignment is internal and subtle and cannot be posted on a wall or quantified in a report. Achievement will earn you applause. Alignment will earn you peace. And for a long time, I had chosen applause because I had been taught, as most of us are taught, that applause is the point. Think about how early that teaching begins. From the very first moments of childhood, we are rewarded for performance. Smile and the room lights up. Perform the expected behavior and love flows toward you. Deviate, resist, insist on your own rhythm, and something withdraws. It might be subtle. It might be nothing more than a slight cooling in the atmosphere, but you feel it. Children are exquisitely sensitive instruments. They read the emotional environment around them with a precision that most adults have long since lost, and they adapt. They learn. They begin the long work of shaping themselves into whatever version earns the most warmth and the least withdrawal. This is not weakness. I want to be absolutely clear about that. This is intelligence. This is your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Reading the social environment, identifying the rules of belonging, and adjusting behavior accordingly. In a world where belonging meant survival, this capacity was essential. It kept human beings alive. But we are no longer living in that world. And the adaptations that once kept us safe are now keeping us small. The very intelligence that protected you as a child is now, in your adult life, operating as the prison. The subconscious rules that formed in response to early pain are still running, still shaping your choices, still narrowing your sense of what is possible, still muting your signal, even though the original threat that created those rules is long gone. This is the tragedy that plays out across most human lives. Not dramatic tragedy, quiet tragedy. The tragedy of a person who is fully capable of extraordinary alignment, but who is running every single day on a program written by their most frightened and most vulnerable moment. You deserve to know that this is what has been happening. You deserve to understand that the voice inside you that says you are not enough, not ready, not worthy, not capable, that voice did not come from truth. It came from protection. It came from a child who needed to survive a particular environment. It came from layers of accumulated muting that were laid over your original frequency, not because your frequency was wrong, but because the world around you did not yet have the capacity to receive it. Your signal was never the problem, the interference was. And interference, no matter how long it has been running, can always be clear. Most people, when they hear the word causal, think of cause and effect in the ordinary mechanical sense. One thing leads to another. You push a domino, it falls, it strikes the next one, and the chain reaction follows. Simple, logical, predictable. And that understanding is not wrong. It is just catastrophically incomplete, because it describes only the surface layer of reality. It describes the visible, the measurable, the already manifested. It describes the world of effects while leaving entirely untouched the deeper world from which those effects emerge. And that deeper world, the realm where causes are actually born before they ever appear in physical form, That is what I mean when I speak of the causal realm. Let me make this as concrete as I possibly can, because this concept deserves to be felt, not just understood intellectually. Right now, in this moment, there are two realities operating simultaneously in your experience. There is the outer reality, the one your five senses can confirm. The room you are in, the people around you, the circumstances of your life as they currently stand, the job, the relationship, the financial situation, the health, the daily rhythm of your existence. All of that is real. I am not asking you to deny any of it or pretend it is not what it is. That outer reality is genuinely present and genuinely powerful, and it deserves to be engaged with honestly. But underneath that outer reality, and I mean underneath it in the most literal sense I can offer, there is another reality that is more fundamental, more primary, more causally powerful. A reality that is not made of matter, but of pattern. Not of things, but of frequency. Not of what has already formed, but of what is in the process of forming. This is the causal realm. This is the dimension of existence where your thoughts, your beliefs, your subconscious convictions, and the frequency of your deepest interior life are actively shaping everything that will eventually appear in your outer experience. Now, I want to address something directly because I know some of you are feeling a pull towards skepticism right now. Good. That pull is healthy. I am not asking you to abandon your critical intelligence. I am asking you to expand it. Because the causal realm is not a mystical fantasy invented to sell books or fill auditoriums. It is the territory that the greatest minds across human history, in physics, in psychology, in philosophy, and spiritual tradition, have been circling from different angles using different languages, arriving at with different methods, but pointing toward the same essential truth. The quantum physicists who demonstrated that the act of observation changes the behavior of particles were touching the edge of this territory. They were finding, in the language of mathematics and laboratory measurement, evidence that consciousness is not simply a passive witness to reality, but an active participant in its formation. The psychologists who mapped the way unconscious belief systems generate self-fulfilling patterns of behavior were describing the causal realm in the language of the mind. The great mystics and spiritual teachers across every tradition who insisted that the inner life is the true source of outer experience were speaking from direct encounter with this same territory. Different maps, same country. I remember sitting with this idea for the first time, really sitting with it, not just reading about it and moving on, and feeling something shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but something in the architecture of how I understood my own life began to reorganize. Because if the causal realm is real, if there genuinely is a level of existence where the patterns of my interior life are actively shaping what manifests in my exterior life, then the implications are staggering. It means that working only on the surface of my life, only rearranging the outer circumstances, only changing jobs or relationships or locations while leaving the interior patterns untouched, is like repainting a house whose foundation is crumbling. The paint will not hold. You know this from your own experience. You have seen it. You have probably lived it. The person who leaves one difficult relationship only to find themselves in an almost identical dynamic with a different person. The person who achieves the financial goal and discovers that the anxiety that drove them toward it has simply relocated to a new target. The person who changes everything on the outside and still feels in the quiet of their private moments exactly the same as they did before the change. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is the causal realm operating with perfect consistency. Because the outer life is always, always, always a faithful reflection of the inner pattern. Always. And this is why the causal realm matters so profoundly to your life right now. Not as a theory, not as a spiritual comfort, but as the most practical possible framework for understanding why your life looks the way it does, and more importantly, what it will take to genuinely change it. Ask yourself right now, and I mean really ask, sit with the discomfort of the honest answer. How much of your energy in life has been directed at the outer layer? How much effort, how much strategy, how much planning and pushing and working has been aimed at rearranging the surface while the causal layer, the deep interior pattern, remained largely untouched? For most people, the answer is almost all of it. We are trained to work on effects. We are trained to measure success by outer results. We are almost never trained to go beneath those results to the causal layer where they actually originate. The causal realm responds to one thing above all others: frequency. Not words, not affirmations repeated without conviction, not the performance of positivity while the subconscious runs its old programs of doubt and limitation underneath. The causal realm responds to the actual frequency of your interior state, to what you genuinely believe at the level below conscious thought, to the signal your subconscious is continuously broadcasting, the one we talked about in the beginning, that original frequency, either clear and strong or buried under layers of suppression and interference. When your subconscious is aligned with the causal realm, when the deep interior pattern matches the frequency of what you genuinely desire to create, things move. Not because the universe is doing you a favor, but because you have removed the contradiction between what you consciously want and what you subconsciously expect. You have cleared the interference. You have let the signal through. And the causal realm, which has been waiting with infinite patience for exactly this alignment, responds the only way it knows how. It creates. Something is running inside you right now that you did not consciously choose to activate. It was running when you woke up this morning. It was running while you were doing the most ordinary, unremarkable parts of your day. It is running at this very moment underneath whatever conscious thoughts you are aware of having, processing information, generating responses, shaping the emotional coloring of your experience, all without asking your permission, all without announcing itself, all without requiring a single moment of your conscious attention. This is your subconscious mind at work. And the more clearly you understand what it actually is, what it actually does, and how it actually operates, the more power you will have to do something about it. Let me walk you through this carefully, because the science here is not dry or abstract. It is deeply, personally relevant to every single outcome in your life. Your brain, over the course of your lifetime, has been building what neuroscientists call neural pathways. Think of them as roads. The first time you have a particular thought or experience a particular emotional response, it is like walking through a field. There is no path yet, just grass. But the second time you have that same thought, the same emotional response, you walk the same route through the field. And the third time, and the 10th, and the 100th. And gradually, over repetition, over time, over the sheer accumulated weight of that thought or response being activated again and again, the grass wears away. A path forms, then a dirt track, then a paved road, then eventually a highway. And highways, as you know, are extraordinarily efficient. Traffic moves fast on a highway. There is almost no resistance. This is exactly what happens with your subconscious pattern. The thoughts and emotional responses that have been most frequently repeated throughout your life, especially those formed in your earliest years, when the brain was at its most plastic and impressionable, have become neural highways. They operate with almost zero friction. They activate automatically, instantly, without requiring conscious deliberation. And because they are automatic, because they run below the threshold of conscious awareness, most people never even realize they are on the highway. They simply experience the destination, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the compulsive behavior, the recurring life pattern, without ever tracing it back to the road that delivered them there. I spent years wondering why certain patterns kept repeating in my life. Not in a self-pitying way. I am not built for sustained self-pity. It exhausts me too quickly. But in a genuinely puzzled way. I would make a conscious decision to change a behavior, and for a while, with effort and discipline, I would hold the change. But then, inevitably, something would happen. Some pressure would build, some trigger would fire, and before I had even fully registered what was occurring, I would find myself back on the old highway, back in the familiar pattern. And the conscious mind, watching this happen yet again, would generate its own response. Frustration, shame, the bitter internal narrative of someone who cannot seem to change no matter how hard they try. What I did not understand then was that I was fighting the wrong battle. You cannot overcome a highway with willpower alone. Willpower is a conscious mind tool, and the conscious mind, for all its remarkable capabilities, is genuinely outmatched by the subconscious in terms of raw processing power. Research in cognitive science suggests that the conscious mind processes somewhere in the range of 40 to 50 bits of information per second. Impressive by any ordinary standard. But the subconscious mind processes somewhere between 11 and 40 million bits of information per second, every second. Without pause, without fatigue, you are not going to outmuscle that with determination. What you need is not more force directed at the symptom. What you need is access to the source. You need to go to the level where the highway was originally built and understand what materials it was constructed from, what beliefs, what early experiences, what emotionally charged conclusions about the nature of reality and your place within it formed the foundation of the pattern. Because only when you understand the foundation can you begin the work of laying a different one. And here is where the science becomes genuinely exciting, because the same neurological research that revealed the power and persistence of these subconscious highways also revealed something that earlier generations did not know with certainty. The brain is not fixed. It is not a static structure that locks into place in childhood and remains unchanged for the rest of your life. The brain is neuroplastic. It retains throughout your entire lifespan the capacity to form new pathways, to build new roads, to redirect traffic away from old highways and onto new routes that you consciously and deliberately construct. This is not wishful thinking. This is measurable, reproducible, documented neuroscience. New experiences, new repeated thoughts, new emotionally charged positive encounters, all of these physically change the structure of the brain. They grow new neural connections. They strengthen new pathways. And over time, with consistency and with the right approach, those new pathways can become the dominant route. The old highway does not disappear entirely. The brain tends to preserve its existing architecture, but it can be bypassed. It can become the road less traveled. The route that no longer gets the automatic traffic because a better, truer, more aligned road has been built alongside it. Now connect this to everything we have been discussing about the causal realm. Your subconscious is the mechanism through which your frequency broadcasts into the causal layer of reality. It is the transmitter. And what it transmits is not what you consciously wish for or intellectually desire. It transmits the actual deeply grooved patterns of belief and expectation that have been built into it over the course of your life. So if your subconscious highways are running old programs of scarcity, unworthiness, and limitation, those are the frequencies entering the causal realm, regardless of what your conscious mind is hoping for. This is not punishment. This is physics. The signal that reaches the causal realm is the signal that gets responded to. And the signal your subconscious sends is the truest signal you have. It reflects not what you want to believe, but what you actually believe at the deepest level of your interior architecture. Changing that signal, building new highways, clearing the interference, aligning the subconscious with the frequency of what is genuinely true and genuinely possible. That is the work. Real work. Profound work. But work that is absolutely, completely, scientifically, and spiritually available to every single person in this room, including you, especially you. There are moments in a life that do not announce themselves as turning points while they are happening. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary difficulty, as simple exhaustion, as just another hard day in a sequence of hard days. You do not recognize them as the hinge on which everything will eventually turn until much later, when you look back from a different place and see the shape of what that moment actually was. The moment I am about to share with you was exactly like that. It did not feel sacred when it was happening. It felt like collapse. And I have come to understand in the years since that collapse and breakthrough are often the same event viewed from different distances. I want to take you there with me. It was a period in my life when I had been running, and I use that word deliberately, running from something I could not name. Outwardly, things were not catastrophic. I was not in the kind of visible crisis that earns sympathy or makes sense to explain to other people. There was no single dramatic disaster I could point to and say, that is why everything feels wrong. It was subtler and therefore more disorienting than outright disaster. It was the creeping, accumulating, impossible to ignore sensation that something fundamental in my life was profoundly misaligned. That I had been building something real and solid and externally impressive, but that the person doing the building had somehow gotten lost in the construction. I remember the evening with unusual clarity. I had come home after a day that was by any reasonable measure successful. Things had gone well. Objectives had been met. And I sat down in the quiet of my own space, in the silence that descends when there is nothing left to do and nowhere left to be, and I felt it. Not dramatically, not with tears or crisis or any of the theatrical signals we associate with genuine breaking points, just a quiet, devastating clarity. A knowing that landed in my chest like something heavy being set down after being carried for far too long. I was not living from my frequency. I was performing around it. Everything I had built, the habits, the routines, the carefully constructed identity, the goals I was working toward, all of it was real, but none of it was connected to that deep original signal I told you about in the beginning. The signal was still there. I could feel it, faintly, the way you feel a sound you cannot quite identify coming from somewhere in a quiet building. But I had constructed so many layers of productivity and purpose and forward motion over the top of it that reaching it felt impossible, like trying to hear a whisper in a room full of machinery. And so I did something I had not done in a very long time. I stopped. Not physically stopped, though I did that too. I sat perfectly still, but I stopped inside. I stopped the internal narration. I stopped the planning and the reviewing and the assessing and the strategizing. I stopped performing even for the audience of my own thoughts, which is the most exhausting performance of all because it never gets an intermission. I just stopped. And in that stopping, in that genuine interior stillness that I had been unconsciously avoiding for months, maybe years, something happened. The signal got through. It did not come as words, which surprised me because I am a man who has always trusted words. It came as a feeling, a direction. The way you sometimes know, without being able to fully explain it, that you need to turn left rather than right. Not because a sign told you, not because logic dictated it, but because something in you simply knows. It was like that. A sense of orientation that bypassed the rational mind entirely and spoke directly to something older and more fundamental in me. And what it communicated in that wordless, directionless, completely unmistakable way was this: you have been building in the wrong direction. Not the wrong career, not the wrong relationships, not the wrong city, the wrong direction. Inward is the direction. Inward is where the work is. Now, the conscious mind predictably immediately began its objections. What does that even mean? Inward is not a strategy. Inward does not pay bills. Inward does not explain itself to colleagues or satisfy the expectations of people who are counting on you. And sitting there in the quiet, I recognized those objections for exactly what they were. The voice of every suppressive layer we talked about in Section 2. The voice of protection. The voice of the subconscious highways that had been built in response to a world that rewarded productivity and punished introspection. The voice of a system that had learned very efficiently to distrust stillness because stillness had once felt dangerous. But underneath those objections, the signal was still there, steady, patient, completely unbothered by the noise of my resistance. And something in me, something tired enough of fighting, tired enough of the gap between my outer momentum and my inner emptiness, chose, for perhaps the first time in years, to trust it. That choice did not fix everything immediately. I want to be honest with you about that, because false promises are an insult to your intelligence and to your experience. The choice to trust that inner signal was the beginning of a long process of excavation and realignment that required more courage and more sustained commitment than anything I had previously undertaken in my external life. There were days it felt like genuine progress. There were days it felt like I was dismantling something that could not be rebuilt. There were days the old highways roared back with such conviction that I genuinely wondered whether what I had heard in that quiet room had been real or simply the wishful thinking of an exhausted man. But here is what kept me going. Here is the thing I want you to hold on to. The signal never lied to me, not once. Every time I was still enough to hear it clearly, it pointed true. Every time I trusted it and took the step it was indicating, something shifted. Not always in the way I expected, not always comfortably, but always in the direction of genuine alignment. And over time, as the alignment deepened, as the subconscious patterns began slowly, incrementally to reorganize around the truth of that original frequency, the outer life began to shift as well. Not because I forced it, because I finally stopped blocking it. You have a moment like that waiting for you. Maybe you have already had it and walked away from it because it frightened you, because what it was asking for felt like too much. That is all right. The signal does not give up. It will offer you the moment again. The only question is whether, this time, you will be willing to be still enough to receive it. Knowing the signal exists is not the same as being able to hear it. And this is where most people get stuck, not in ignorance, but in the gap between understanding and application. You can read every book ever written about the subconscious mind. You can attend every seminar, absorb every framework, collect every insight about the nature of the causal realm and the power of inner alignment. And still, if you have not done the specific, unglamorous, deeply personal work of clearing the interference, the static that sits between your conscious awareness and your original frequency, all of that knowledge remains exactly that. Knowledge. Impressive in conversation, useless in transformation. So let us talk about the static. Let us get specific. The first and most foundational layer of interference is what I call inherited belief. These are not the beliefs you consciously chose. These are the beliefs that were installed in you before you had the cognitive development to evaluate them, question them, or decide whether they actually reflected truth. They came from the people who raised you, from the culture that surrounded you, from the religious or social frameworks that shaped the environment of your earliest years. And they cover every domain of life. What is possible for someone like you? What you deserve? What love looks like, what money means, what safety requires, what success costs. Here is the critical thing about inherited beliefs. They do not feel like beliefs. They feel like reality. That distinction is everything. A belief you can identify as a belief, you can examine, you can question, you can choose to revise. But a belief that feels like reality, that feels like simply the way things are, the way the world works, the way people behave, the way life unfolds, that belief is invisible to examination because you are not looking at it, you are looking through it. It is the lens, not the object, and you cannot clean a lens you do not know you are wearing. I spent years looking through lenses I did not know I had. One of the most significant was a belief about worthiness that I had inherited so completely, so thoroughly, so early in life that I would have laughed, genuinely laughed, if someone had suggested it was not simply the truth. It was the belief that the right to peace, to stillness, to genuine rest had to be earned. That you could only stop moving once you had accomplished enough to justify the stopping. That productivity was the price of existence, and any moment not spent producing was a moment borrowed against a debt that was always, somehow, still growing. I did not know I believed this. I simply lived it. And it drove me, productively, efficiently, impressively, directly away from the stillness in which my original frequency lived. It was the perfect interference, a belief system so aligned with the cultural values of achievement and progress that it looked, from every external angle, like a virtue. Nobody looks at a hard-working, productive person and says, "I think your relationship with stillness might be a suppression mechanism." They say, "Well done." They hand you awards. They hold you up as an example. And meanwhile, the static runs, and the signal waits. The second major layer of interference is emotional residue, the unprocessed emotional experiences that sit in the body and the subconscious like old weather systems, generating turbulence long after the original storm has passed. Grief that was never fully felt, anger that was deemed unacceptable and therefore swallowed, fear that was survived by being suppressed rather than moved, shame that calcified into identity. These unprocessed emotional states do not disappear because you do not look at them. They go underground. And underground, they continue to operate, continue to color the frequency of your subconscious broadcasts, continue to introduce distortion into the signal between your interior life and the causal realm. You cannot think your way past them. You cannot intellectually analyze them into resolution. They must be felt, fully, safely, deliberately felt, in order to be genuinely released. This is the work most people are most reluctant to do, because feeling old pain intentionally feels to the protective subconscious like choosing injury. Everything in your survival programming will resist it. Every avoidance strategy, overwork, overconsumption, constant distraction, endless busyness, exists in part to prevent this encounter. And the strategies are sophisticated. They are convincing. They dress themselves up as responsibility, as practicality, as strength. I don't have time to sit around processing feeling. I have a life to run. That voice is not wrong that you have a life to run. It is wrong that the running is more important than the clearing. The third layer of static is borrowed identity. Over the course of your life, you have accumulated a self-concept, a story about who you are, what you are capable of, what you deserve, what kind of person you fundamentally are. And portions of that story are genuinely yours. They reflect real experience, real growth, real hard-won understanding of your own nature. But other portions were handed to you by parents who projected their own unlived possibilities or their own unexamined fears onto you, by teachers who assessed you through the narrow lens of institutional metric, by past relationships that defined you in ways that served the dynamic of the relationship rather than the truth of who you are, by your own past self, the version of you that made decisions from a more frightened, more limited, more externally oriented place, whose choices you are still perhaps living inside of. Ask yourself right now, which parts of your self-concept were actually chosen and which were simply accepted because the authority of whoever handed them to you felt greater than your own authority over your own nature. Breaking the static is not a single dramatic act. It is a practice. It is the daily, committed, courageous discipline of noticing when inherited belief is speaking, when emotional residue is generating distortion, when borrowed identity is narrowing your sense of the possible, and choosing in that moment of noticing not to automatically follow the old road. You do not have to demolish the highway. You simply have to notice when you are on it. That noticing, practiced consistently, creates something remarkable. It creates a gap, a small space between the automatic pattern and your response to it. And in that gap, that small, hard-won space of conscious awareness between stimulus and reaction, lives every possibility of change, every possibility of genuine realignment, every possibility of letting your original frequency, clear and strong and patient as it has always been, finally move without obstruction toward the causal realm that has been waiting to respond to it. The static was never permanent. It only felt that way because nobody told you it could be cleared. Now you know. Clearing the static is the preparation. What comes next is the art. And I use the word art deliberately because what I am about to describe is not a mechanical process. It is not a formula you execute once and then file away as completed. It is something you practice, the way a musician practices, the way an athlete practices, with the understanding that the practice itself is not separate from the mastery, but is the path through which mastery is continually deepened. You are not fixing a broken machine. You are tuning a living instrument. And a living instrument requires ongoing, attentive, loving care. Not because it is fragile, but because it is responsive. Because it feels everything. Because it is capable of producing something so far beyond ordinary that ordinary maintenance simply will not reach it. So how do you tune it? Let me be specific. The first and most foundational practice is what I call deliberate stillness, not passive stillness, not simply the absence of noise or activity, but an active, intentional turning of attention inward. A conscious choice to direct the extraordinary processing power of your awareness away from the outer world, which is relentlessly demanding of it, and toward the interior landscape where your frequency actually lives. This is the practice that every genuine wisdom tradition across human history has pointed toward, regardless of the specific form it takes: meditation, contemplative prayer, silent sitting, directed visualization. The form matters far less than the function, and the function is always the same: to create a reliable, repeatable pathway back to your own signal. Most people resist this practice not because they do not believe in it, but because they underestimate what it asks of them. It asks you to be alone with yourself without agenda, without the buffer of productivity, without the comfortable noise of external stimuli. And for many people, for most people, honestly, in the world we currently live in, that encounter with unmediated selfhood is genuinely uncomfortable. Because in the stillness, what you find first is not peace. What you find first is everything you have been avoiding. The thoughts you have been outrunning. The feelings you have been drowning in distraction. The questions you have been too busy to sit with. The stillness surfaces all of it before it gives you the deeper thing it is offering. This is why so many people try meditation or contemplative practice once or twice, find it uncomfortable, and conclude that it does not work for them. It is working. The discomfort is the work. Push through the surface layer, not by forcing it down, but by allowing it to move through you without grabbing onto it, without building a story around it, without treating every uncomfortable thought as evidence of something being fundamentally wrong with you. Simply observe, simply allow, and gradually, over sessions and days and weeks of this practice, the surface turbulence settles. And beneath it, patient, clear, steady, exactly where it has always been, the original frequency waits. The second tuning practice is what I call frequency affirmation, and I want to distinguish this very carefully from the popular but often misunderstood practice of positive affirmation. Repeating positive statements to yourself that you do not actually believe at the subconscious level does not align your frequency. it creates conflict. The conscious mind says one thing, while the subconscious, with its vastly superior processing power, runs the contradicting program underneath. And the subconscious always wins that contest, which is why so many people who practice conventional affirmation feel vaguely fraudulent while doing it and see little genuine change in their lives as a result. Frequency affirmation works differently. Instead of asserting a desired outcome, you practice inhabiting the emotional and energetic state of a person for whom that outcome is already a lived reality. Not pretending, genuinely reaching for the feeling, the felt sense of what genuine alignment, genuine abundance, genuine creative freedom, genuine love actually feels like in the body, in the nervous system, in the quality of your interior atmosphere. Because the causal realm, as we have established, does not respond to words. It responds to frequency. And frequency is not intellectual, it is felt. This is subtle, but it is everything. Think about someone you know who carries genuine confidence, not performed confidence, not the aggressive overcorrection of someone masking deep insecurity, but the quiet, grounded, undefended confidence of someone who is genuinely at home in themselves. You can feel it when you are near them. It has a quality, an atmosphere. That quality is their frequency, broadcasting into the space around them. And the remarkable thing is that the people, opportunities, and circumstances that enter their life tend to match that frequency with extraordinary consistency. Not because they are lucky, because they are aligned. You can cultivate that deliberately, systematically, through the repeated, genuine practice of inhabiting the felt state of your aligned self. The third tuning practice is directed prayer. And here I use the word prayer in its broadest and most essential meaning, entirely independent of any specific religious tradition. By prayer, I mean the conscious, intentional, emotionally sincere act of communing with the intelligence that underlies the causal realm. Whatever name you give that intelligence, God, the universe, consciousness, the infinite, the deeper order of things, the practice is the same. You bring your genuine self to the encounter, not your performed self, not your hopeful self, not the version of you that is trying to say the right things in the right way. Your actual self, with your actual desires, your actual fears, your actual confusion, and your actual longing, and you speak from that place, honestly, directly, without the intermediary of theological formality or the performance of piety. Genuine prayer, approached this way, does something remarkable to the subconscious. It reorganizes it around sincerity. It interrupts the automatic patterns by introducing something the patterns cannot process: pure, undefended honesty about what you actually are and what you actually need. And in that honesty, in that genuine interior vulnerability before the deeper intelligence of the causal realm, something opens. Something in the architecture of your inner life becomes available for reorganization in a way that effort and strategy and willpower simply cannot reach. These three practices, deliberate stillness, frequency affirmation, directed prayer, are not separate techniques to be rotated through on a schedule. They are facets of a single integrated discipline, the discipline of returning again and again to the truth of your own interior, of choosing each day to prioritize the alignment of the instrument over the performance of the music. Because here is what every great musician knows: a perfectly tuned instrument plays itself. The music that wants to move through you, the life that is trying to emerge from your deepest alignment with the causal realm, does not need to be forced. It does not need to be manufactured or strategized or white-knuckled into existence. It needs the instrument to be ready. Tune it. Every day, without exception, without apology. And then listen for what begins to play. Something remarkable happens when the instrument is tuned. Not immediately, always. Not in the dramatic, overnight, everything changes at once way that we are culturally conditioned to expect transformation to arrive. But something begins. Something shifts at a level that precedes the visible, the measurable, the confirmable by ordinary external evidence. And if you are paying attention, if you have done enough of the interior work to have developed genuine sensitivity to the subtle movements of your own experience, you will feel it before you see it. You will sense the change in atmosphere before it appears in circumstances. You will know, with a quiet and undefended certainty, that something in the invisible architecture of your life has reorganized, that the causal layer has received a different signal and has begun its faithful, unhurried work of translating that signal into form. Let me tell you what this actually looks like in a real life, not in theory, in practice. When your frequency genuinely shifts, when your subconscious alignment with the causal realm deepens past the surface level of intellectual agreement into the cellular level of lived conviction, the first thing that changes is not your circumstances. It is your perception. You begin to notice things that were always present, but previously invisible to you. Opportunities that existed in your environment, but that your old frequency, tuned to a different channel, simply could not receive. People whose paths crossed yours regularly, but who suddenly now seem to have something essential to offer. Connections, coincidences, openings, not manufactured, not forced, not the result of more aggressive strategy or harder pushing, but simply there, available, as if they had been waiting at the edge of your awareness for the moment when you became capable of recognizing them. This is not mysticism. This is perceptual psychology meeting causal reality. Your reticular activating system, the neurological filter through which your brain decides what in your environment deserves conscious attention and what gets screened out as irrelevant, is tuned by your dominant interior frequency. Change the frequency, and the filter changes. Change the filter, and the world you perceive quite literally changes. Not because the world itself has rearranged, but because you are now receptive to dimensions of it that your previous alignment rendered invisible. I remember the first time I experienced this with genuine clarity. There was a period shortly after the turning point I described earlier when I had committed seriously to the tuning practices we just discussed. Weeks of deliberate stillness, of genuine interior honesty, of the slow, unglamorous work of clearing inherited belief and emotional residue. And then one ordinary morning, walking through a familiar neighborhood I had walked through dozens of times before, I had the distinct and undeniable sensation that I was seeing it differently. Not that anything had changed. The same buildings, the same trees, the same people moving through their mornings. But the quality of my reception had changed. There was a porousness to my perception that had not been there before. A sense of genuine contact with what was around me, rather than the usual filtered, managed, safely distanced processing of external reality that I had mistaken for normal awareness. And in the weeks and months that followed that shift in perception, the outer circumstances did begin to move. Collaborations appeared that I had not sought. Resources emerged from directions I had not anticipated. The right conversations happened at the right moments with a consistency that defied the logic of random chance and pointed towards something more organized, more responsive, more intelligent than luck. Not because the universe had decided to reward my interior work with external gifts, but because the alignment between my subconscious frequency and the causal realm had removed the friction that was previously blocking what was always trying to flow toward me. This is the principle at the heart of everything we have been building toward together. The causal realm is not withholding from you. It has never been withholding. Everything that belongs to your genuine, aligned life, every relationship, every creative expression, every form of abundance that resonates with your true frequency, is already present in the causal layer, already organized around the signal of who you authentically are. The only thing that has ever stood between you and its manifestation in physical form is the interference, the static. The misalignment between what your subconscious broadcasts and what your deepest self genuinely is. Remove the interference. Align the signal. And what was always yours begins to arrive. Now, I want to speak honestly about the timing, because false promises serve no one, and I respect you too much to offer them. The movement from inner alignment to outer manifestation is not always swift. The causal realm operates on its own intelligence, its own timing, its own understanding of what needs to be prepared and what needs to be cleared before the fullness of what you are aligned with can safely and sustainably appear in your life. Sometimes things move with breathtaking speed. Sometimes the process is slower, deeper, more circuitous than you hope. And the temptation in the slower periods is to conclude that the alignment is not working, that the signal is not being received, that you have done the interior work and the exterior world has simply not responded. Resist that conclusion with everything you have. The slower periods are not evidence of failure. They are often the periods of deepest preparation, the invisible structural work that precedes visible change, the way the unseen work of roots precedes the appearance of fruit. Keep tuning the instrument. Keep clearing the static. Keep showing up to the interior work with the same commitment you would bring to anything in your outer life that genuinely mattered to you. Because when frequency fully meets form, when the alignment is deep enough, clear enough, sustained enough, what appears in your life will not feel like something you achieved. It will feel like something you finally stopped preventing. And that feeling, that profound recognition of life moving naturally through an unobstructed channel, is worth every moment of the work that preceded it. Every single moment. Everything we have walked through together has been leading to this moment, not a conclusion. I want to be clear about that, because what I am about to say is not a conclusion. It is a beginning. The most important beginning available to you right now in this season of your life, with everything you carry and everything you dream and everything that has happened to you and everything that is still waiting to happen through you. This is the moment where understanding becomes decision, where insight becomes commitment, where the frequency you have been rediscovering throughout everything we have shared together stops being a concept you find interesting and becomes the organizing principle of how you actually live. That shift from interesting to lived is the only shift that matters. Because the truth is, you already know more than enough. You have always known more than enough. The human beings who live the smallest, most constrained, most frequency-suppressed lives are not lacking in information. They are not short on inspiration. They have read the books, attended the seminars, felt the stirring of recognition when something true was spoken in their direction. They have had their moments of genuine contact with their own original signal. They have glimpsed, however briefly, the life that their deepest alignment is capable of producing. What they have not done is decide, and I mean decide in the fullest, most uncompromising sense of that word. Not the decision that lasts 3 days before the old highways reassert their dominance. Not the decision that lives comfortably in the future. I will begin when conditions are better, when I have more time, when things settle down, when I feel more ready. Those are not decisions. Those are delays dressed in the language of intention. A real decision changes the present moment. A real decision reorganizes your immediate interior landscape, right now, regardless of what the outer circumstances are doing. A real decision says, the alignment begins here, with what I have, with who I am, with the life I am already living, and it begins now. Ask yourself honestly, have you made that decision yet? Not whether you want to, not whether you believe in the principles, not whether the ideas we have explored resonate with something true inside you, whether you have decided, whether you have planted the flag in the ground of your own interior and said, without qualification and without the escape hatch of eventually, this frequency, this alignment, this original signal that I was born carrying, I am choosing it fully, permanently. as the foundation of everything from this point forward. That decision made genuinely changes everything. I think about the people I have known across the course of my life who made that decision, really made it, not as a moment of inspiration, but as a fundamental reorientation of their entire interior life. And without exception, without a single exception, what followed was remarkable. Not always easy, never without challenge, often deeply uncomfortable in the early stages as the old patterns resisted reorganization with everything they had. But remarkable, genuinely, undeniably remarkable. Lives that began to move with a quality of flow, of rightness, of deepening alignment between inner truth and outer reality that made the years of suppression and static seem, from the other side, almost incomprehensible. Not because they became different people, because they became more completely themselves. That is the destination this whole journey has been pointing toward. Not a transformed identity that bears no resemblance to who you have been. Not the erasure of your history or the rejection of everything your life has taught you. The full, undefended, unashamed emergence of who you have always been underneath the suppression. The frequency that was present before the world began its muting work. The signal that survived every layer of interference, every inherited belief, every borrowed identity, every unprocessed grief, every highway built in the direction of smallness, survived all of it, intact, patient, luminous, waiting. That frequency is your future, not metaphorically, literally. The life that is available to you on the other side of genuine alignment, the relationships, the creative expression, the contribution, the abundance, the deep daily sense of rightness and purpose, all of it is organized around that signal. All of it is already present in the causal realm, already structured around the truth of who you are, already waiting with the same patient certainty that your signal itself has always carried. The only variable is you. The only question is whether you will do the work, the real work, the interior work, the daily practice of stillness and clearing and tuning to bring your subconscious into genuine alignment with what the causal realm has always known about you. You are not too late. You are not too damaged. You are not too far from your own frequency to find your way back to it. Nobody is. The signal does not degrade. It does not diminish with time or with difficulty or with the accumulated weight of years lived in misalignment. It is not a resource that depletes. It is not a window that closes. It is the most permanent thing about you, more permanent than your circumstances, more permanent than your history, more permanent than any story you or anyone else has ever told about who you are and what is possible for you. Go into stillness and listen for it. Clear the interference with courage and consistency and the willingness to feel what you have been avoiding. Tune the instrument every single day without apology, without waiting for permission, without making the alignment conditional on conditions that may never be perfect. And then trust with the full weight of everything we have walked through together. Trust that the causal realm has always been listening, that it has always been responsive, that it has always been organized around the deepest truth of your frequency, waiting for the moment when you would finally stop suppressing it and let it sing. That moment is now. This moment, yours. The frequency was never lost, and the future it creates has always been waiting. Go claim it.